Welcome to Say the Question. I'm Joe, this is Sam, and today we're asking about staged kindness videos. When a good deed is filmed, cut for drama, and suddenly the helper looks like the biggest winner in the room.
Yeah, that's where it gets weird fast. If the kindness is designed to be watched, the platform starts rewarding the performance of generosity, not just the generosity itself.
Right, and that's the slippery part we should pin down. Let's start with the starting take. When the helper is also clearly the main beneficiary, what are we actually looking at? Sam, start us off.
Okay, here's the uncomfortable version. The second kindness gets a ring light, a cut-down soundtrack, and a sponsor tag, it starts to feel less like generosity and more like something built to make the helper look good. And I'm not even saying the helping is fake. I'm saying the presentation makes you ask who the moment is really for.
That's the right place to start, because the camera doesn't automatically make a good act bad. But it does change what the act is doing in public. Once the helper becomes the visible center of the story, the question shifts from, did someone get helped? To, what does the whole package reward?
Exactly. Private kindness is one thing. You hand somebody a meal, you don't make them audition for your feed, and everybody can go home with their dignity intact. Public kindness can still be real, but the second it's packaged for applause, I start wondering whether the needy person is the subject or the scenery.
And that's the pressure point. The suspicion isn't just people are vain, although sure, people are vain. It's that the format can turn helping into something that also produces attention, status, and sometimes money. Which means the helper may be getting a second benefit that is hard to ignore.
Right, and viewers can feel that even when they can't prove it. There's this little internal flinch where you go, wait, am I supposed to be moved or am I supposed to applaud the person filming the move? And honestly, that flinch is not random. It's the part of us that hates being sold a moral feeling like it's a thing you should just accept because the edit is tidy.
That's fair, but I'd be careful with the leap from feels staged to therefore bad. A video can be polished, edited, and optimized without being a total fraud. The cleaner question is whether the presentation is clarifying the generosity or hijacking it.
So what's the honest distinction there? Because I think a lot of people want a simple rule like, if there's a camera, it's contaminated. That's too easy, but it's also doing some work because cameras do attract weird behavior. Once people know they're being watched, everybody gets a little more polished and a little more strategic.
The useful version is not camera equals lie. It's more like, what role does the camera play in the act? If it's documenting something that would still make sense without an audience, that's different from building the whole moment around being admired for helping. Same surface action, different moral shape.
And the moral shape is the part people argue about, because nobody wants to sound like a jerk for doubting generosity. But viewers aren't crazy for noticing when the giver is framed like the hero, the visuals are flattering, and the whole thing seems designed to leave you thinking, please admire my compassion. That's not proof of evil. It is a warning sign.
Yes, and the warning sign matters because it tells us what the video is optimized for. If the helper is also the main beneficiary of visibility, then we have to ask whether the kindness is being used as content or whether the content is being used to spread the kindness. Those are not the same thing.
That's the question. And it's why people get weirdly defensive about this stuff. They don't just want to defend the video, they want to defend the feeling they got from it. Which, fair, nobody likes realizing they were emotionally marketed to by a good deed.
And to be clear, we're not saying every staged kindness video is fake or gross. Some of them are probably decent acts that were filmed because people genuinely want to share them. But the suspicion shows up fast when the creator's face, branding, and payoff are doing as much work as the helping itself.
Yeah, because then the charity starts to feel like the excuse for the content instead of the point of it. And you can feel the difference even if you can't prove intent. The act might still help somebody, but the presentation is telling on the person making it.
That's the stronger version of the suspicion. Not, I know their heart and it's rotten, but this setup rewards self-display so heavily that I can't just read it as pure generosity.
Right. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee it. Even when the person means well, the format can make the whole thing feel like a performance where the helper is the main beneficiary and the recipient is there to make the performance legible.
Which is why this question sticks in people's heads. They're not just reacting to one video. They're reacting to a whole pattern where generosity, visibility, and self-promotion get blended until the line between helping and advertising starts to blur.
Okay, before we drift into lazy cynicism, let's sit with why these videos feel off in the first place. It's not just someone helped somebody. It's the whole presentation. The soft music, the clean lighting, the pause before the reveal, the sense that the camera already knows who the hero is supposed to be.
Right. And that presentation tells the viewer how to feel. The video isn't only showing generosity, it's directing it, almost like it has cue cards for your reaction. You're supposed to be moved, grateful, and impressed, all in the exact order the edit wants.
That's the part people notice even if they don't say it cleanly. They don't just feel moved, they feel slightly handled. Not in the dramatic, I've uncovered a fraud way, more like, why does this good deed arrive with the emotional packaging of a trailer for the helper's personal brand?
And the edit is making the helper the emotional center.
Yes, that's the weird part. The recipient is real, the help may be real, but the moral spotlight keeps sliding back to the person holding the camera or standing just off it like, look how much of a good person I am for arranging this whole thing.
And that's why people get suspicious, without being able to prove anything darker. Publicness by itself isn't the problem. It's when the publicness is tuned so the helper gets maximum visibility, maximum credit, and maximum emotional payoff, while the person being helped starts to look like proof of the helper's character.
That distinction matters because viewers can be moved and suspicious at the same time. People keep acting like those two reactions cancel each other out, but they don't. You can think, I'm glad this person got help, and also think, this was built to make me admire the giver. And both thoughts can be honest.
That's the useful version of it. The same surface action can have a different moral shape depending on how controlled the scene is. A quiet act that happened to get filmed is one thing. A scene designed around the reveal, the reaction, and the clean payoff is another. People are reading that difference pretty fast.
And once you see the pattern, it becomes hard to unsee. The lighting feels chosen. The music tells you when to tear up. The edit trims away anything messy. Even if nobody said a word about money, status, or growth, the structure still nudges you toward this is content first, charity second.
Which is why the suspicion lands so quickly. It's not simple jealousy, and it's not automatically moral panic either. It's a very normal reaction to being shown something that looks like generosity, but behaves like a performance, especially when the helper is framed as the main beneficiary of the whole scene.
So the honest complaint isn't people shouldn't film kindness. It's more like, if you control every visible part of the moment, don't act shocked when people wonder whether the help is being used to sell the helper. That's where the awkwardness comes from. Not from hatred of nice things, just from seeing how cleanly a nice thing can be turned into a prestige object.
And that sets up the bad first answer, which is usually some version of, well, at least somebody got helped. That answer is too easy. It dodges the actual question, which is what the format rewards what the viewer is being asked to admire, and why the helper-centered version feels so much more interesting than the help itself.
The two lazy answers are both garbage. One is, if it was filmed, it was fake. The other is, if somebody helped anybody, stop being cynical and clap like a trained seal. Neither one is serious, and both of them are weirdly comforting for people who don't want to think very hard.
That's the right place to start, because both answers are too clean. One makes intent impossible to trust. The other makes intent irrelevant. Real life is messier than either of those, which is annoying, but useful.
And the reason people jump to the fake take is obvious. The camera is there, the lighting is weirdly good, and everybody suddenly remembers their good side. That does not mean no one was helped. It means you should assume the filming changed the behavior, which is not nothing.
Right, and that is where people overcorrect. Filming is not a truth machine, but it is also not a lie machine. A person can genuinely give food, money, a ride, whatever, and still know that recording it will make the story spread better than a private act ever would.
Which is the annoying part, because people want one verdict. Either the helper is a saint or they're a scammer in a clean shirt. The internet loves that because it saves everyone from thinking, and it lets the audience feel morally superior in whatever direction they pick.
And that's the bad bargain. If you assume every filmed good deed is fake, you end up denying real help because the packaging is obnoxious. If you assume every filmed good deed is pure, you stop noticing when the packaging is doing half the work. Both mistakes are real.
I think that's the part people skip. They're not just asking, was there help? They're asking, do I get to hate this format yet? And once they decide that, the rest of the evidence gets dragged around by the verdict.
Yeah, and the format does invite that reaction. If the camera is always close enough to catch the giver's face, the reaction, the music sting, the little reaction shot, then the whole thing starts leaning toward performance. But leaning toward performance is not the same thing as being invented from scratch.
So where would you draw the line? At what point do you stop saying, this is a real act that got filmed, and start saying, no, this is basically a content production that happened to include kindness?
I think the line is whether the helper seems to be arranging reality around the camera or just documenting something that would still matter without the camera. If the person would only do the act when the setup is perfect for a post, that is a very different thing from someone who did help, then realized, a little too happily, that it also makes a good clip.
That's useful because it keeps us out of the dumb binary. The act can be real, the editing can still be manipulative, and the creator can still be enjoying the attention more than the virtue. None of that requires a villain speech. It just requires people to like rewards.
Exactly. That's why the labels matter so much. Staged can mean anything from lightly arranged to basically manufactured. And kindness can cover everything from honest help to a polished self-image project. If you do not decode the label, you end up arguing with a word instead of the behavior.
And that's the real trap. People hear kindness and assume moral purity, or hear staged and assume fraud. The next question is whether those words are actually telling you anything useful or just hiding the part that matters. Okay, but before we keep calling everything fake, we should decode the words people are throwing around. Genuine, performative, monetized, optimized. Those are not neutral labels. They already drag the argument halfway to the verdict.
That's the useful move, because people say genuine like it's a clean category, when usually they mean, I believe the help was real and not just a prop. That's different from, I like how it was filmed. Those are separate questions, and people keep shoving them into one bucket because it feels faster.
Right, and performative gets used like a moral jump scare. Sometimes it means the camera is part of the act, and sometimes it means I don't trust this person, so now I hate the lighting. The word can be fair, but it also gets used as a shortcut to skip the evidence.
The camera being present doesn't prove the kindness is fake. It proves the kindness is being presented. Those are related, but they are not the same thing. And honestly, that distinction matters because a lot of the argument lives in that tiny gap.
Which is already weird because once you start filming the good deed, you're not just documenting it, you're packaging it for
an audience, yeah. And once you do that, the question isn't just whether the help was real, it's what the help was asked to become.
So where do you draw the line then? If the help is real, but the video is engineered, when does smart presentation turn into a tell? Because I think people can smell the difference even when they can't prove it.
I think the line is whether the presentation starts changing the nature of the help, not just the framing of it. Monetized doesn't mean fake. It means rewarded. And once reward enters the room, you should expect more of whatever gets attention, whether that's sincerity, spectacle, or both. That's not a moral verdict yet. It's just how incentives work.
And platform optimized is basically the same idea with a nicer tie. It means somebody is shaping the thing for the site's incentives, not that they confess to fraud in a leather chair. They're trying to get watched, shared, remembered, maybe praised. That doesn't make them a villain. It does mean the shape of the video is doing extra work.
Exactly. Platforms reward things they can measure. Watch time, clicks, shares, likes, dislikes, survey responses, all the machinery under the hood. So optimization is real and measurable, but it's not identical to deception. You can optimize for reach without lying, and you can also optimize in ways that make the viewer's judgment easier to steer.
Which is why authentic gets slippery. On a platform, authentic can mean felt honest to viewers, or counted as original enough to pay, or not copied so obviously the policy people notice. That is not the same thing as morally sincere, and everybody knows it even when they pretend not to.
Right, it's doing policy work and moral work at the same time. YouTube's own rules basically show that authentic can be a content category, a monetization category, and a vibe people use in arguments, all at once. So when someone hears that word and thinks clean-hearted, while somebody else hears eligible for reward, they're not even reading the same sentence.
So when someone says, no, this is for awareness, that's not automatically a lie, but it is often a very convenient umbrella. It can cover actual charity, self-promotion, and please praise my brand all at once. That's the part that makes people squint. The phrase sounds bigger than the thing it might be hiding.
That's the part I trust least. For awareness can be real, but it can also be a label that asks you not to look too hard at who benefits. And that doesn't mean the helper is lying exactly. It means the phrase is doing some of the emotional lifting for them.
So the cleaner version is, don't ask whether the words sound good. Ask what they're doing. Are they describing help or dressing up help so the helper gets the spotlight? Because those are not the same sentence, and the next step is seeing which one the actual video behaves like. Okay, but before we get too abstract about sincerity, let's look at the mechanics. These videos aren't just somebody being nice with a phone in their hand. There's a whole little production ecosystem around them, and that ecosystem changes what nice ends up looking like.
That's the right place to stand. A lot of this isn't some mysterious lie so much as a format that's been trained to look good in a feed. And once that happens, people start building for the feed, whether they admit it or not.
And YouTube basically tells you what gets rewarded: watch time, shares, likes, dislikes, survey responses. So if a clip makes people feel something fast, the system notices, and creators notice the system noticing, which is how you get 100 little clones of the same emotional shape.
So what part of that is actually fair to be suspicious about? Is it the editing itself, or the way the edit is trying to steer the viewer toward one clean emotional reaction?
The second one, mostly. Editing is normal. The weird part is when the video feels assembled around the reaction more than around the good deed. Like the kindness is just the delivery system for the payoff at the end.
Right, and the payoff is the point. YouTube has said that when watch time got added into recommendations, views dropped by 20% immediately. That's a good reminder that small ranking changes can teach creators very quickly what kind of pacing works and what kind of pacing disappears.
Which is why these clips start looking eerily similar. Big setup, visible struggle, obvious rescue, then the look back at the camera moment where everybody's supposed to think, wow, this is real. Maybe it is real, but it's also really legible, and legible things get rewarded.
And the money side matters too. YouTube's monetization policies allow edited footage and reaction content to monetize when the editing clearly transforms the reused material. So heavy editing isn't automatically suspicious. Sometimes it's literally part of the business model, not an extra layer slapped on top.
That's the distinction people keep smearing together. It is edited does not equal it is fake. It can just mean the creator knows the clip has to survive the platform, survive the feed, and survive the attention span of somebody eating lunch while pretending not to be moved.
And the packaging gets reinforced everywhere. Even on Meta, the guidance is basically that captions and calls to action help people understand why a post matters and can expand reach and engagement. So creators are constantly being nudged to turn an act into a readable story, whether they call it that or not.
Which explains the clean framing, the camera staying on the giver, the neat little arc, the title card energy. It explains why the whole thing looks like a miniature morality play built for replay. It still doesn't tell us whether the giver is the main beneficiary, though.
That's the honest line. The outside context makes the style feel predictable instead of shocking. But it doesn't absolve it. And it doesn't prove pure motives either. The next question is whether the polish is just presentation, or whether the presentation itself is doing the real work for the creator.
Okay, but the next question is, who actually gets rewarded when one of these kindness videos lands? Because once the clip is polished enough, the camera stops being a neutral witness and starts acting like part of the business model.
Mostly the creator. They get attention, followers, maybe money, and a cleaner public identity. The person who helps. The helped person can still get something real, but they also become part of the video's architecture, which is a little different from being the whole point.
Joe, what's the cleanest version of that incentive chain? Because incentives can sound like one of those business school phrases that hides the ugly part.
Fine version. A clip that produces a strong emotional reaction gets more likes, shares, and watch time. YouTube has said those engagement signals help recommendations reach new audiences. So the creator learns pretty fast that warmth plus visibility is a repeatable combo.
And the person being helped becomes part of the machinery.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean the help is fake. It means the help is now doing two jobs: helping somebody in front of the camera and helping the person behind it build reach, a brand, and whatever else follows from being trusted on screen.
which is why the same shape keeps showing up. Once a format proves it can pull a reaction, everybody notices. Clean before and after, emotional reveal, tidy payoff, maybe a little cry, and then the feed lights up like it just discovered gravity. At that point, you're not just seeing kindness. You're seeing a format that knows what it is supposed to produce.
And there are real monetary incentives sitting underneath that too. YouTube's monetization policies say creators can monetize original, authentic content and certain edited or transformed, reused content. So editing and packaging are not just cosmetic. They can be part of the earning strategy. That doesn't prove cynicism, but it absolutely explains why polish keeps winning.
So the generosity video is not just a story about generosity. It's also a template for what gets rewarded. The helper stays central. The camera gets the credit for making it legible. And the person helped is often there to complete the narrative rather than control it. And once the creator sees that pattern work, why wouldn't they keep leaning into it?
Because the audience rewards it back. People like the quick moral payoff of good happened, problem solved. And once they get used to that, they start expecting the same emotional shape every time. If a video gives you relief in 30 seconds, it trains you to want that relief again. That's not a conspiracy. It's just repetition with applause.
That's the most annoying part, honestly. The clip can contain real help, but the format teaches everybody to care most about the performance of help, not the unglamorous part where somebody quietly gets what they need and nobody gets applause for it.
And here's the part people skip. Once a creator learns that the polished version travels better, there is pressure to keep polishing. Maybe that means better lighting, tighter editing, clearer emotional beats, or just making every later video fit the same winning shape. The incentive doesn't have to be evil to be strong. It just has to work.
So the motive mix can be messy. Actual goodwill, self-image, platform pressure, maybe even charity. But the camera privileges the part that flatters the creator. That's the part people feel in their gut, even when they can't cleanly prove it. Joe, am I overstating the creator benefit part if I say it's often the loudest part?
Not if you keep it at often and not always. That's the fair suspicion. Not, this is all fake, but this setup rewards the helper for being seen as helpful. Once that lesson works once, it spreads because it pays in attention, status, and sometimes money. Nobody needs a secret room for that. The incentives are already loud enough.
Right, and that leads to the split we keep circling. The public story says, look at the kindness, while the structure keeps asking, how do we make kindness perform better next time? So the polite answer and the real answer aren't the same thing. And that's exactly why these videos make people suspicious. Okay, so once you follow the incentives, the next ugly little step is separating the polite answer from the real answer. The polite answer is always some version of, I just wanted to help. That might be true, but it is also the answer that sounds best on camera, which is suspicious in the same way a resume is suspicious. Not automatically false, just aggressively self-edited.
That's the cleaner version, yes. The important part is not to pretend the clean version and the messy version are mutually exclusive. Somebody can genuinely enjoy helping a person and also enjoy being seen helping. Those are not competing motives in the courtroom sense. They can just sit next to each other.
Right, and that's where the public story starts to get too polished. Because the public story is never, I like being admired for being kind. It's always, why are you making this about me? I'm only trying to spread positivity, which, sure, maybe. But if the video is lit like a commercial and edited like a highlight reel, the self-branding is doing some of the moral work, whether people admit it or not.
And that's the useful distinction. Not lying versus truth, but what the format rewards. A polished moral image can function like any other personal brand. It gets attention, it gets approval, it can grow a following, and it can make the creator feel like a good person without requiring them to be a fraud. That last part matters because people love turning this into, aha, gotcha, you were evil the whole time. And that's too simple.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do the cartoon villain thing. I'm saying the format gives people a way to look generous while also getting paid in attention, status, and the warm bath of applause. And once that's available, it becomes naive to assume the camera is just a bystander. The camera is the point, or at least part of it.
That's fair, with one caveat. If we say the camera is part of it, we still have to ask whether the creator is conscious of that in a strategic way, or just drifting into it because that's what the platform teaches them works. Those are different claims. One is, this person is using kindness as a wrapper. The other is, this person has learned that kindness gets rewarded, so they keep doing more of it in public.
That's actually the more uncomfortable answer, because it's less neat. It means the person may not be faking the helping part at all. They might feel good about it, do some real good, and still be building a little identity machine at the same time, which is very human and also kind of annoying, because now nobody gets to stay pure.
And audiences often prefer the polite story because it lets them consume the video without friction. They get to think, nice, someone helps somebody, instead of, I watched a little morality package designed to feel good and perform goodness at the same time. The first version is easier to enjoy. The second version is closer to how the content actually works.
So am I overstating it if I say the real answer is usually not fake charity, but real charity heavily branded?
That's close, but I'd tighten it. Real help plus visible self-benefit is safer and more accurate. Heavily branded is fine when the production is obvious, but I wouldn't make branding sound like proof of bad intent. The honest version is usually uglier than the polite version, but not as evil as the worst sounding version.
That middle is exactly where people get annoyed, though. Nobody wants to admit the helper can be sincere and opportunistic at the same time because it ruins the clean moral story. But that mess is the whole point. If the attention reward is built into the format, then a lot of these videos are doing two jobs at once.
So where do you draw the line then? At what point does nice and visible become the branding is doing more work than the generosity?
I think it crosses the line when the video seems organized around the helper's image more than the helped person's actual outcome. Not because every shot of the creator is sinister, but because the emphasis tells you what the content is selling. If the kindness disappears the second the camera turns off, that's one thing. If the kindness is real, but the presentation keeps circling back to the giver's glow up, that's a different beast.
Yeah, that's the line I'd keep too. The critique works best when it stays on structure and emphasis. What gets rewarded, what gets centered, and what the audience is being asked to admire. Once you say that clearly, you don't have to accuse every creator of being fake. You can just say, the format makes real generosity look suspicious on purpose.
Okay, so the fair split here is not real kindness versus fake kindness. It's more like one version is that the help is real and the camera is just how modern people notice it. The other version is that the help is real, but the person holding the camera is also building a brand off the moment. So the helper and the beneficiary are not the same person anymore. And that changes the moral temperature of the whole thing.
That's the cleanest way to say it. And I think both readings are defensible, which is annoying but true. A public act can help somebody and still be arranged to flatter the person doing it. The existence of self-interest does not automatically erase the help. It just means you have to look at what the video is doing, not only what it claims to be.
Right, but attention is not some innocent byproduct people forgot to mention. If you film yourself being generous, edit it for maximum tears, and put your own face in the center, you're not just sharing a deed. You're manufacturing a little moral receipt for yourself and hoping the audience pays in admiration.
Sure, but if that receipt also leads to more people donating, copying the behavior, or even noticing a problem they had been scrolling past, then the public part is doing actual work. I don't love how polished that can get, but I don't think polish alone proves the thing is morally empty. Sometimes the visible version is the one that reaches people.
So where would you draw the line? Because I can live with the video helped, but I'm less relaxed when the clip feels designed to make the creator look like the only adult in the room. At some point, it stops being generosity with documentation and starts being documentation with a little generosity attached.
I'd look at the burden the clip puts on the scene. If the person being helped has to stay anonymous, silent, or conveniently teary so the creator can look noble, that's a bad sign. If the video keeps steering the viewer back to the helper's face, the helper's voice, and the helper's emotional journey, then the help may be real, but the framing is taking a lot of the oxygen.
That's the part that bugs people, I think. They can tell the clip is not nothing, but they can also tell the creator is getting paid in status. And status is sticky. Once you've turned compassion into a repeatable content format, it starts to look less like a good deed and more like a business model wearing a halo.
Maybe, but I want to keep one distinction intact. Status is not the same thing as fraud. If somebody is helped and the audience is nudged toward more helping, then the creator can be benefiting from a real action without the action being invented. The ugly part is that the same clip can be sincere, strategic, and self-promotional all at once.
That's exactly why the moral center can move. The needy person becomes the occasion, the creator becomes the story. And then the whole thing starts feeling like the helper is the main character, while the help is just the plot device that gets them there.
But that's only if the framing actually does that.
Which is, annoyingly, what a lot of these clips do. Not always, but enough that viewers aren't crazy for getting suspicious when the lighting is nice and the emotion is conveniently edited into a neat arc.
Fair. And I think the suspicion gets more legitimate when the video asks for praise the same way it asks for attention. If the whole thing is structured to convert generosity into personal prestige, people are reacting to that structure, not just being cynical for sport.
Yeah, and that structure can be subtle. Nobody has to sit there twirling a mustache and saying, how do we make this about me? It can just drift that way because the creator knows the clip performs better when their reaction is the real subject and the help is the emotional furniture around it.
That's a better version of the concern than everyone is lying. A lot of the time, the more honest complaint is that the format nudges people towards self-conscious virtue. Not a forged act, just a staged one with incentives that pull the spotlight the wrong direction.
So the useful test is still the ugly simple one. If the glory gets stripped away, does the help still matter? If the answer is yes, then I'm not saying the kindness is fake. I'm saying the clip is probably trying too hard to make sure the giver gets remembered first.
Exactly. The honest version is that suspicion is warranted when the video seems designed to maximize credit for the giver, not just visibility for the cause. The unfair version is assuming every visible act of help is a scam. So the real test is whether the help would still matter if the creator got a lot less glory from it.
That's the useful version. If the person in need could vanish from the frame and the clip would still basically exist as a self-promo piece, that's the warning sign. If the help stays the point, even when the spotlight dims, then we can still roll our eyes at the format without pretending the generosity is imaginary. Okay, so the part we actually have to draw is this. When does "this feels staged" become a fair criticism, and when does it turn into gossip with a cleaner haircut?
That's the line. If you're reacting to the framing, the edit, the obvious timing, the way the camera keeps circling back to the giver, that's fair territory. If you're leaping from that to, "I know what this person is like in private," now you're doing extra work with almost no evidence.
So the threshold is visible behavior, not psychic reading. Good, because the internet loves acting like it has a warrant to search somebody's soul just because the thumbnail annoyed them.
Exactly. You can say, "This video is built to make the helper look heroic." You cannot automatically say, "This person is a fraud everywhere else." Those are different claims, and the second one needs a lot more than vibes.
And that matters because a lot of people stop at, "I feel weird about this," and then sprint straight into character assassination. They skip the boring middle step where you ask whether the criticism is about the video, the business model, or the person.
Right, and the boring middle step is the important one. A video can be manipulative in presentation without the creator being a manipulative monster. And a creator can be self-serving without every individual post being a lie. The evidence has to match the claim.
What about the pattern, though? If every clip has the same polished arc, the same emotional beat, the same little look at the camera like, "Please admire my humanity," at some point it stops being a one-off and starts looking like a strategy.
Sure, patterns matter. Repetition is evidence of design choices, and design choices can be judged. But even then, you're still judging the format and the incentives first. The move from "this is optimized for attention" to "this person is secretly awful" is where people get lazy.
So annoyance is not an indictment. That's probably the cleanest version. You can hate the production, hate the self-congratulation, hate the way the helper always seems to land center frame, and still not know enough to go after the person's whole life.
That's the useful distinction. Online people often treat cynicism like it's discernment, but sometimes it's just a faster path to feeling smarter than everyone else. The minute the conversation becomes, "Let's expose them," instead of "Let's assess the setup," you've probably lost the thread.
And then it gets gross. Because now it's not skepticism anymore. It's a little hunt for punishment. People want the format to be invalidated, the creator to be humbled, and the audience to feel morally superior for noticing the trick.
Yeah, and that's the point where criticism stops being curious. If your goal is only to make somebody look stupid, you are no longer asking a fair question. You're just dressing up a pile-on as media literacy.
That's the bad version. The fair version is much narrower. This is a highly produced, monetized display of generosity, so I should be cautious about what it proves. That is a real sentence. Therefore, I know the person's heart is not.
And that caution should extend to private life. If the only thing you're using is a polished clip, stay in the lane of the clip. Once you start treating someone's ordinary life, relationships, or motives as open season, you're not protecting yourself from being fooled anymore.
You're doing the very thing you claim to hate. Acting entitled to more access because you got annoyed. That is where skepticism turns into intrusion. And honestly, it gets dumb fast.
It does. The line is simple in theory, harder in practice. Question the framing. Question the incentive. Question the performance. Don't start pretending annoyance gives you authority over somebody's motives or personal life.
And to be fair, that doesn't mean never be suspicious. It means keep the suspicion attached to something you can actually point to. If all you have is a bad feeling, that's a cue to slow down, not to start writing a manifesto.
That's the better version of the rule. If the clip is the claim, critique the clip. If the complaint is about the business model, say that. If you're about to treat the person's whole identity as public property, you've gone past skepticism and into something uglier.
And the annoying part is that audiences help keep this alive. If people didn't reward the polished little hero shot, the polished little hero shot would be a lot less profitable. So the next question isn't just, is this staged? It's, why do we keep clicking the staged version when it flatters our suspicion so nicely? Okay, so we already drew the line on the creators, but the annoying follow-up is whether the audience is rewarding the dress rehearsal. If people only clicked on honest, boring generosity, a lot of this stuff would never become a format. So the next question is not just who's staging the kindness, it's who keeps making the staged version worth doing.
That's the useful shift. Once something is built for attention, the people watching are not neutral observers anymore. They're part of the feedback loop. Platforms use things like likes, shares, watch time, and reactions to decide what gets shown more. So the crowd is not just standing outside the machine and judging it. The crowd is helping decide what the machine notices.
And that's where people get weirdly self-exonerating. They want to say, I only watched it because I was skeptical, like skepticism turns you into a prosecutor instead of just another pair of eyes on the clip. Meanwhile, the clip is collecting attention either way, and attention is still attention, even if you delivered it with a little eye roll on top.
Right, and there are at least 3 different reactions people keep collapsing into one bucket: enjoying the clip, hate watching it, and accidentally helping it spread. Those are not morally identical, and I wouldn't pretend they are. But the platform doesn't really sort them like a philosophy class. It sees activity, it sees return visits, it sees sharing, and it learns that the thing is worth showing again.
So what's the fair version of that? Because I don't want to say every annoyed viewer is guilty of manufacturing the whole thing. That feels too easy, and it lets the actual people making money off the performance disappear behind a crowd scold. But it also seems dumb to pretend the audience is completely innocent just because the audience is also being manipulated.
The fair version is that not every click is a vote for the performance. Sometimes people are looking for the obvious tell. Sometimes they genuinely liked the moment. Sometimes they clicked because the editing looked suspicious and they wanted to check it for themselves. But once the clip gets rewatched, reshared, and argued over, the system does not care much about the purity of the motive.
It just sees motion.
Exactly. And that's the part people hate because it sounds blunt, but it's true. You can disapprove of something and still be part of the reason it travels. If you comment, clip, stitch, repost, or keep the argument alive, you may be doing a real critique, but you're also adding fuel. The platform doesn't hand out moral credit for your tone.
That's the ugly middle. You can enjoy a clip without being a sucker, and you can hate watch a clip without being some heroic fraud detective. But those are different motives, not different outcomes. Once the thing gets measured, all that matters is that people stayed long enough to react. And now the system has a reason to send it to more people.
And the more emotionally obvious the clip is, the easier that becomes. A polished kindness video might get clicked because it's inspiring, suspicious, funny, fake-looking, or all four at once. That emotional friction is what gives it lift. People stop, they react, they share the clip with a comment attached, and suddenly it looks like the topic has broader demand than it really had at the start.
So the audience isn't some innocent courtroom gallery sitting way outside the mess. It's more like everybody in the room keeps passing the same thing around and then acting shocked that it keeps circulating. Not because every viewer is a villain, obviously, but because everybody thinks their own reaction is special and therefore exempt from the larger pattern.
That's the cleanest way to say it. Creators can package the thing, but viewers decide which packages get lifted, mocked, rewarded, or ignored. And recommendations aren't just about one angry comment or one share. They're shaped by ongoing engagement and watch history. So, repeated reactions can train the system toward more of the same emotional style. That's why the audience isn't just the audience here. It's part of the sorting process.
Which is the annoying answer, because it means you don't get to stand outside it with a clean coat on and pretend your reaction doesn't count. You can laugh at it, hate it, share it, or swear you're only there to expose it. But if you keep feeding the same emotional format, don't act stunned when you get more of it. That's the real part everybody wants to skip.
Yeah, the creators may be packaging it, but the viewers are still helping decide what survives, what spreads, and what gets rewarded next. So the listener's own behavior is part of the answer too. Whether they like the clip, hate it, or accidentally help it travel.
Okay, I think we can land this without pretending it's more mysterious than it is. Not every produced kindness video is fake, but the camera can absolutely change what the act is for.
That's the clean version. The help can be real and still be packaged in a way that makes the giver look like the main event. And that packaging is where the suspicion comes from.
So the real question isn't, did anything good happen? It's, what is the video doing around the good thing, and who gets rewarded once it's clipped, captioned, and posted?
Right, and that's a better test because it doesn't require mind reading. You can look at the structure. Is the person helped actually centered? Or does the whole thing keep drifting back to the person filming, reacting, and being congratulated for having witnessed generosity?
Where would you draw the line, though? Because there is a real difference between documenting something useful and turning somebody's need into a little stage for your own brand.
I draw it at intent plus effect. If filming helps the person get money, visibility, or support they actually want, then the camera is doing a job. If filming mainly creates applause for the giver, then the act is still real, but the video is selling a different story than the one it claims to be telling.
That's the part people skip. They jump straight from something good happened to, therefore this is pure, as if the edit can't influence the meaning at all.
And the edit can absolutely influence the meaning. A filmed donation can be a record, a fundraiser, a witness, or a self-congratulation machine. And sometimes it's a mix of those. The point is not that every camera is corrupt. It's that the camera often changes which part of the act gets the most oxygen.
That's why the polished ones make people bristle. Not because a clean shot automatically proves bad motives, but because the whole setup can feel like, please admire the helper first, and then maybe notice the help.
Exactly. That's the useful skepticism. Judge the structure, not just the warm feeling it's trying to create. If the structure keeps pointing back to the giver's image, their brand, or their monetization, then viewers are right to ask what the video is really optimizing for.
And to be fair, there are exceptions that matter. If the person being helped wants the attention, or if the video actually helps raise money or locate someone. Then the filming is part of the help, not just decoration around it.
That's the part that keeps this from turning into stupid cynicism. You don't have to assume every visible good deed is fake. You just have to notice when visibility is serving the cause versus when it's mostly serving the person holding the phone.
So the answer is, don't ban the camera, don't worship the camera, and definitely don't hand out saint points just because the video had soft lighting and a sad piano line under it.
Yeah, be open to real generosity, but keep your eye on the framing. The easiest way to say it is that the camera can document kindness, or it can turn kindness into the product. And once it starts doing the second one, skepticism is just common sense. And that's where this question lands. We're glad you listened to Say the Question. Subscribe or follow wherever you're listening, and we'll catch you tomorrow.